With the Eminence of Shadow coming out early October, there were plenty of reviews and takes from whether or not the show is actually worth a watch. The opinion for the show is kind of all over the place. Some people liked it, some people hated it, but all in all, people watched it. The plot is basically about an overpowered character who's reincarnated into a world. In this world, his goal is to be so powerful that not even a nuke can affect him. And it's only hilarious and funny because of the fact that he's acting, he's role-playing. His main goal is to be a background character. My man's low-key just wants to be an Anbu. That's it. He calls out all the evil plans, even the organization's name, by accident. He just names stuff at random and it comes out to be true. Now this guy's stat level as he got reincarnated is either as high as Kazuma's, or plot is heavily just working to make sure that it works out for him, since, you know, if it didn't, then the show would roll credits. I think comedy is absolutely something that is carrying this anime, as well as the general self-awareness and personality that Cid has definitely makes it worth the watch in the long run. Cid picks everything that he interacts with very carefully. We see this in episode 3, as Cid is hanging out with his two background character classmates, and he is bet into approaching Princess Alexia, one of his classmates within his school. Now, Cid doesn't just approach her like a normal person would. He's not actually genuinely shy or have any concerns about the situation. Rather, he wants to take this opportunity to purposely approach her in the most background-esque shy character way you can possibly think of. And it makes for a hilarious scene that definitely highlights the good parts of the show.
僕と付き合ってください。完璧だ。
This backfires on Cid, however, and Alexia actually has a plan of her own, using Cid as bait to get out of a marriage proposal that she was forced into by her family. Once Cid finds this out, he's not too happy, and he's pretty much willing to just walk away from the situation, but is inevitably bribed with money. Now, anybody would expect Cid to walk away from the situation, since he doesn't want to stand out and it would affect his background character. But, of course, this man, Cid, goes ahead and does the complete opposite, turning into a literal dog for the sake of gathering a few golden coins. And I think that's another highlight for the show. They always keep you on your toes, doing the complete unexpected from what you would think somebody who is trying to stay in the shadows would do. The show isn't predictable. Cid has various different moods and turn of monologues that makes you feel like I have this character figured out. He goes and does the complete opposite, and not in some normal-esque character way. He does it in the most hilarious, nonsensical way you can imagine. And we have a lot more comedic scenes, especially like in episode 4 when Cid is interrogated and pretends to be hurt, all so that he can keep up the background character persona. Even though he could completely break free at any point in time, he goes along with the charade, even adding in hilarious lines and screaming like some background character would.
でモブっぽい尋問するんだ。このモブ度の高さ。僕も遅れを取るわけにはいかない。もう許して。どうだ。僕の方がモブっぽいだろ。ほら、はっきり言えよ。どうか命だけはこんな。まあしかしこれ。
We also have another hilarious scene in episode 6 in which he pretends to have to use the bathroom in the middle of the street from eating too much bad chocolate, telling his two good friends to run for their lives so that he can go and actually join a fight. Or one of my favorites, in episode 7, where he fights Rose and pretends to be outmatched so that he can specifically practice his background character injury techniques, in which each strike he receives from Rose, he flies back in the most over-dramatic way you can possibly think of, going as far as to have fake blood all over his clothes to make people think that he is genuinely getting the life beaten out of him. It's definitely one of the most hilarious scenes in the show, and I think it is definitely peak comedy. But comedy isn't the only thing that the show is good for, and it's some of the action scenes as well as the sound quality that the show produces. Many of the fight scenes are beautifully choreographed, and not to mention, the movements for the characters are very fluent. They're not stiff at all, and it also helps the immersion when it comes to the sound design. And this is all due to the fact that the sound director, who is the same person that worked on Fire Force, Jin Akutagawa, is the person behind the sound design for the Eminence of the Shadow. The various different bass effects and how much quality was actually put into the fight scenes and the sound effects throughout the show in general.
ひどいわね。
我らはシャドウガーデン。
And it threw me off that this anime actually went out of their way to choreograph this, especially since fighting isn't really the priority for this anime. Sure, they have fight scenes here and there, but they usually last only but few seconds, if not a minute. And I think maybe because the fights are so short that they're able to put so much attention into each individual fight, which is good for us since it allows us to immerse more into each individual fight and take in all the small and big details that they give us while the action is carrying on. And this is good for watching the story long term due to the fact that the key to watching any anime is immersion. And if I can say that the Eminence in Shadow does anything right, immersion is one of them. And you can't mention immersion without also bringing up the beautiful soundtrack that is covered within each episode. Some of my favorite themes being the Shadow Garden theme, Alpha's theme, and of course Moonlight Sonita, just to name a few. With all the properly placed music, action, storytelling, and comedy, Cid is really just one big chunibyo wrapped up in his own world, and he is convinced that Shadow Garden is simply going along with his chunibyo-ish tendencies. And it's even funnier because Cid pokes at himself sometimes and is fully aware that he is literally just a chunibyo with overpowered abilities. And with these whims comes the two sides of Cid's personality. You have the chunibyo who wants to be this background character and pull off as much comedic, manga-accurate panels you could imagine, just to satisfy his own chunibyo-ish tendencies. And on the other side, we have Shadow, who has a whole checklist of things he would like to do as an overpowered main character within the sidelines. And this is highlighted in different episodes, and you can literally see him checking off the list of things he would like to do as he goes, such as jumping off rooftops. It shows once more that Cid isn't taking anything around him seriously. Now, remember earlier when I said the main character, who is Cid, wanted to become so powerful that not even a nuke can affect him? He decided that, well, if I can't create an attack to defeat a nuke, then why don't I just become a nuke myself? And while he does this, he spouts the words,
Atomic.
He says them in the most satisfying 4D way, and I can't wait for season 2 since we absolutely will be getting more of this. Even though Cid has a great arsenal of attacks and the atomic in his back belt, he doesn't like to always resort to fighting. And another thing that keeps this show quite interesting is the fact that Cid has to constantly pretend that he's weak in the face of enemies and allies in order to fool them from thinking that he's actually Shadow. This isn't just a hobby of his. This isn't just some game. This is what he lives for. And it is both hilarious and cool to see how Shadow deals with each individual enemy. And in the further episodes, we see many more instances when Shadow has to come up with creative ways to hide his identity, using misdirection by flashing magic in the air to force other people to look in the other direction while he uses his massive speed to change into his persona. Or when Cid actually figures out who the head attacker of the school is and confronts him in the library, in which he pretends to be hit so hard that he lunges himself out the window, which if he were a normal person would result to him falling in his death. However, he uses the same momentum to jump back into the window, now as Shadow, completely fooling the enemy, making them think that he is a completely different person. And this is something that I think the show does both extremely well and hilariously, since it's completely unnecessary, and the fact that Cid is always able to keep his true nature under wraps with nobody able to question, since he seems to be like such a weak character. The creativity to how Shadow is able to mask his true nature and go out of his way to pretend to both be a side character in a hilarious and story-driven manner is something that's both entertaining and drives a reason to continue to watch the show. What other opponents is Cid gonna fight, and how will he convince them that he's not as powerful as they may think he is or believe? But if the show carried this concept by itself alone, it would not be able to stand to be as good as it actually is. Cid gets the itch every once in a while, believe it or not, to show off his strength and overpowered abilities. In order to do this, he'll go as far as getting disguises to enter tournaments undercover, while wiping the floor with absolutely everybody and living out one of his fantasies, or purposely allowing his opponents to believe that he is underpowered so that he can later pull off his atomic attack and show off how outmatched they are. This really highlights both sides of Cid's personality that tie a bow on the show. And the first time we see this is when Cid gets put into a tournament where the greatest fighters gather and summon warriors from the past that determine exactly how powerful and skillful they are. Now this is a detriment to Shadow due to the fact that if he summons a warrior as Cid, then everybody would be able to figure out that he's absolutely overpowered. So he decides to show up as Shadow, throw the tournament off, and follow along by summoning one of the most powerful beings currently known in the lore of the Eminence of Shadow. For the first time in the series, we see Cid actually enjoy a battle. I enjoyed watching the battle quite a lot actually, and the animation along with the sound effects and the way that the fight was choreographed was actually pretty appealing to watch. And that's another thing that I think the Eminence of Shadow does very well. I don't think I've ever watched another anime with an attack like this, where the camera angles shift and spiral as if you're being attacked by this yourself. But Cid doesn't carry this show alone. The support he has from Shadow Garden, as well as the other supporting characters throughout the show, help support Cid's character in a pretty good manner that don't give them too much screen time, but help move the story along without making it feel like they're stopping the progression. And I also think that's extremely important when making a story. Sometimes filler is a major thing, or boring sequences where characters will interact outside of the main character that really don't matter or progress the plot. And this show actually avoids that. In every sequence and clip, there's something that is happening on the screen that moves the plot along or is hilariously comedic in order to pass the time so that by the time you do finish the episode, you are satisfied and filled. And it's primarily the reason why a season 2 is in such high demand. It's extremely hard for a show to continue without being boring, add oversaturation of jokes,
詳しい資料もあるはず。よかった。
or land boring fight scenes and plots. But this show manages to dodge every single one of those bullets and is absolutely top tier because of this. And immediately after I posted, season 2 was announced a few hours after episode 20 was finished, which shows that the developers are extremely serious about this show. All in all, this show is absolutely a must watch, and it's everything I didn't expect it to be. When you look at Cid's face, you expect a normal, boring main character story with a character who's simply overpowered and just does what he wants. This is partially true, but it's interesting to see that everything that he does affects the world around him, especially characters like Rose or Cherry. They might not always be happy endings, but Cid is fully unconscious of the fact that everything that's going on around him is both serious and dire. But he has so much power and ability and is stuck in his Shinobi-ish ways that none of it really matters to him. But the comedy, the storytelling, the side characters, the soundtrack, all wrap this up into one brilliant show that is the Eminence of Shadow. At the end of the day, Cid lives in his own world, and it's completely fine with him. To be honest, it's completely fine with me. As long as we keep getting comedy, beautiful soundtracks, and a story that moves along in a solid way, then I think the Eminence of Shadow is everything that it needs to be. I don't think it matters whether or not we like this anime or not, because at the end of the day,